Hey everybody, Professor H here again. I just wanted to make 3 or 4 short little videos for you for our chapter on motivation. I'll do some separate ones for emotion, even though they share a chapter. So let's get started. So what is motivation? How do we explain motivation? Well, there are several different theories about motivation that we'll look at in our little videos that we're going to do. Also, there's some really great ones out there on YouTube if you need some further explanation or to dive deeper into some of these different different theories of motivation that we're going to look at. There's lots of resources out there. But for our purposes, for Psych 1, which is our introductory psychology course, we're going to just kind of keep it on an entry level here. So what is motivation? Motivation is talking about factors that direct and energize the behavior of humans and other organisms towards a goal. So it is the reason we do something. What is it that is driving us or causing us to have a particular behavior, take a particular action? What is it making us do that? That's when we talk about motivation, the thing that is making us do something. It includes behavioral things, cognitive things, which are thought processes and such, and social aspects. It's studied with a variety of approaches, which we're going to take a look at through this short series of videos. And all approaches seek to explain the energy that guides behavior in specific directions. So each particular theory of motivation we're going to look at can explain certain phenomena, certain behaviors that we have, certain actions that we take, but each one of these theories in itself is not going to explain everything about motivation. And you'll see that a lot in psychology. You'll see several different theories about something, and each one of those theories covers a portion of that particular behavior or phenomenon. The first type of motivation we're going to talk about is intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. A quick definition of motivation that I believe is used in our book is the wants or needs that direct behavior toward a goal. Kind of a simplified version, but it's direct and to the point, I guess. Let's start with intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is basically, it arises from internal factors. So you are doing something because you truly like doing it and you truly want to do it. So these are things that are internally motivated. They're coming from within you. Extrinsic motivation arrives from external factors. The behaviors are performed in order to receive something from others. So if you are really enjoying, let's say you really like reading. You really like reading, so you're going to read some books and you're going to talk to your friends about these books you're reading. This would be intrinsically motivated behavior. The reading of the book, the talking to the friends about it, that would be intrinsic motivation because it's coming from within, that intrinsic. Now, if, however, you are not really that into reading and you decided that you're going to join the book club and you're going to read these books so that you can go to these meetings and talk to people, in that case, the reading of the book and the talking about the book would be extrinsically motivated. Because in this case, you're doing it not because you enjoy reading, not because you enjoy talking about the book, but because you want the social interaction, because you want to be part of a group. Maybe it's going to fulfill some type of social need. So the motivation is from an external type of reward you're getting. Another example would be, let's say that I like to do leather work. So I like to do figure carving of leather, like carve a nice moose or a big trout or something on a piece of leather and maybe color it, whatever. Or maybe do some horse tack or make purses. And, I like to make stuff out of leather. So, and I'm intrinsically motivated to do this. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I love creating that type of art and useful items like knife cases, rifle cases. I really like doing rifle cases, things like that that are fun. or like little knife cases. It's just fun, or book covers, fun stuff, right? Now, if I were to be doing the leather work because, okay, I know how to do it, maybe I was taught how to do it, but I don't really do it unless I have to. I'm only doing it because I'm getting paid to do it. That would be an extrinsic motivation. I am making you a wallet because I'm paid to make you a wallet. You know, it's an okay job, but I'm doing it because of the money, not just because I feel like sitting down and making a wallet. So that's kind of the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic. When we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, we're basically talking about a cognitive approach to motivation. In other words, we're kind of taking a look at our thought processes. When we think about cognitive approaches, we're thinking that this suggests that motivation is a result of people's thoughts, beliefs, and expectations and goals. So all of those things are contributing to whether or not you are having intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. Now, in real life, these two are not mutually exclusive. In other words, sometimes we're doing things because we like it and we're getting paid. So it's a mix of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. A couple of things that I didn't mention on the last slide that I probably should have. It showed punishment there and it showed rewards. Well, obviously, you know, if we're doing something and we get rewarded for it, we're going to be more likely to do it again. And that reward is usually some type of external thing, which could be praise, it could be money, it could be whatever. The other thing, and that is extrinsic motivation. We're extrinsically motivated to get those things. Now, the punishment aspect of it that I should have said on the last slide but didn't, is talking about, let's say that authoritarian type of parenting styles, which you read about in a previous chapter. This is a type of parenting where you're basically kind of not listening to what the kid says. You are very strict, maybe, and oftentimes when you're trying to get a child to change their behavior, if you are using this type of parenting style, you're going to end up with an extrinsically motivated change rather than an intrinsically motivated change. For example, if I want my kid to not smoke, and I tell my kid, if you smoke, you're not going to live in this house. You're going to, you know, this, that, and the other, threat, whatever. You know, you're going to, you know, you can't smoke. You better not ever smoke. I better not catch you smoking. Then the child may not smoke due to extrinsic motivation. In other words, it's not internalized. So maybe under a certain situation, when that kid has a chance to smoke, they might be like, well, haha, you're not the boss of me, I'm going to smoke. Or, you know, maybe they're thinking, well, I really shouldn't smoke, but they're more easily led down that path. If it's intrinsically motivated, if you were approaching it something like, you know, hey, you know, what are some reasons why you think you shouldn't smoke? And the kid comes up with a bunch of reasons why they shouldn't smoke. And then you talk to the kid and you're like, well, what are you going to do when your friends want you to smoke? And they're like, oh, well, I can just tell them this and that, or maybe I can leave or whatever. They come up with some type of plan. In this case, that child might be more intrinsically motivated to not smoke. In other words, it would be their decision coming from internal motivation rather than the extrinsic or external motivation of threats and things like that. I'm not going to say that works in every case. I'm just saying that that is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about punishment and reward with that. And I didn't talk about it on the last slide. Once again, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are not mutually exclusive. Oftentimes there's components of both in our motivation behind doing stuff. The way to remember the two is that intrinsic, you can see it has in, and that means inside. It's coming from internal. sources. Extrinsic has the EX here, like exit, from external, outside. And those are good ways to remember that. As I mentioned before, intrinsic and extrinsic motivation can exist at the same time. And the relationship between them is pretty interesting. There's something called the overjustification effect. What this effect is that intrinsic motivation is diminished when extrinsic motivation is given. In other words, wanting to do something just because you like it is diminished when you're given extrinsic motivation, like if you're paid. So the example your book gives is that, okay, so this person who has this job, like at a grocery store or something, loves to bake. So a lot of times they go home after work and they whip up some cakes and they whip up some cookies and some really delicious stuff to eat. And they really, really love to bake. So all of a sudden, a opening occurs at the grocery store and the bakery, and this person applies for it and gets that job. So now this person is baking every day at work, and so now as she's baking at work more and more and working in this area, when she goes home, she's no longer making cookies and baking things and having that much fun doing it. And so this is an example where in certain cases, something we like to do when it becomes a job switches from being an intrinsically motivated task to an extrinsically motivated task. And once we are receiving an extrinsic motivation, like being paid, we may lose our motivation to do it just for enjoyment. Now, there is other research that suggests the opposite, that certain types of reinforcement, such as praise, can increase intrinsic motivation. Some explanations of the differences are the different types of reinforcement. Tangible rewards appear to decrease intrinsic motivation. So a tangible reward would be something like getting money, getting paid for doing it. An intangible reward is something that usually increases motivation. That would be getting praise, getting, a pat on the back, basically, a boost to your self-esteem, things like that that are coming from the exterior will often increase the motivation. Expectation of extrinsic reward. Intrinsic motivation is likely to decrease if extrinsic reward is expected. So, in other words, you're doing something because you like it, but then at the same time, you're expecting to get paid. That expectation of getting paid is going to reduce your intrinsic enjoyment of the task. So that's kind of the relationship between the two. Oftentimes, you do something you love. You have great intrinsic motivation for doing it. Next thing you know, you turn it into a business. Once you're doing it for a business, your intrinsic motivation decreases and the extrinsic motivation, your intrinsic decreases, your extrinsic increases. So you become more externally motivated. Oftentimes, that also comes with a decrease in the enjoyment of the task. That's it for this video. Next time, we will look at instinct and drive reduction theories of motivation. Some other theories that we'll be looking at are the incentives approach, arousal theory, hunger and eating, and social efficacy and social motivation theories. Take care.